On your election headquarters, and today I need to say that you can join us with the views and comments via social media at Joy News on TV, on Facebook, at Joy News on TV, also on Twitter. Send us a tweet with the hashtag The Pulse. We'll be glad to share our thoughts with the rest of the world. And we begin today because the Electoral Commission has been painstakingly explaining what series of reforms will inform the conduct of this year's elections. Questions had emerged quite strongly about the processes for this year's elections, considering the brouhaha which had characterized the aftermath of the 2012 elections, which led to the nation waiting for the credibility of the polls to be determined by the Supreme Court 8 months after Election Day. Well, at a meeting today with news editors from selected media outlets, Chairperson of the Commission, Charlotte Osei, took time to explain what has informed these new arrangements. Raymond Akwa, my colleague, was at this news briefing, joins me in the studio now with details. Good afternoon to you, Raymond.
Good afternoon.
I know a lot was discussed today at this meeting with news editors, but let's pick out the key strands here. The first one that jumps at me is that contentious matter of overvoting. What was that about?
So the discussion up until this time was that you could define overvoting to mean the number of people on the voters register. If you check the number of ballots in the box plus the rejected ballots, and they are more than what was on the voters register, then you are convinced deep within your heart that there's been overvoting. This particular position has been canvassed by various political parties, but the understanding we have today is that we have eliminated the element of the voters register. Indeed, it's the verification machine that replaces the voters register. So now, if there are more people on the voters, what they call it, the ballot box, as against the number of people on the verification machine as verified on the election day, then we can say that there's overvoting. So then the issue is going to now compile number of ballots in the box plus the rejected ballots and compare it to the number of people who have been verified. That, according to the Commission, is a tighter, more rigid method of defining overvoting that goes straight to the core of the matter.
How different is this from what we saw in 2012 and that contentious matter we saw play out at the Supreme Court when the MPP went to file these issues?
The main difference was that then people were saying that, okay, so if you want to determine overvoting, forget about the biometric verification device. Go straight to the voters register. If there are more ballots in the box plus rejected ballots compared to the number of people on the voters register, then can say that there's overvoting. In that case, if there are 500 people on the voters register and you see 501 in the ballot box, that means there's overvoting. But the Commission says no, that can actually, because mostly you don't expect there to be 100% turnout at the polling station. We should look at the number of people who verify to vote as a standard. So if there are more people in the ballot box than on the verification machine, then there is overvoting.
Okay, let's hear from Charlotte Osei on this, and then we'll come back and look at the other issues that came up today as part of the list of reforms to be expected in this year's elections.
As you know, when overvoting happens, the Electoral Commission would cancel the results of that polling station. And the results would only, the elections would only be rerun if it is significant to the final outcome. Now, there were definitions that tied overvoting to the number of people on the register of that polling station, which would bring up the issue that has come up. If you have, let's say, 900 people at the polling station, it cannot be that all of them came to vote. So actually tying the definition of overvoting to the number of people on the polling station is what creates the problem. What we're saying is, we informed IPAC last year that the definition of overvoting that the EC would apply would be where the number of valid votes in the box exceeds the number of people who were verified to vote. So what we're actually doing closes that gap, because it ensures that if you have 900 people on a polling station and only 820 came to vote, you can't pad it by 80. Because the results are not tied to the number of people who are on the register, but to the number of people who have been verified to vote. And the number of people who have been verified to vote is a fact that anyone who was part of the process can confirm at any time, either by going to the machines or by also counting the number of manual verification forms. So it's a tighter definition.
That's how to say on the matter of overvoting. It was contentious in 2012. This is their solution to that problem. We'll see whether or not it satisfies the concerns that came up in 2020, and whether the political parties, especially the MPP who went to the Supreme Court on this matter, will understand that this will be the best solution to this problem. But Raymond, other issues came up today in terms of the electoral reforms that are to be rolled out. One thing that also struck me is the issue of inviting the services of lawyers and accountants at the collation centers. What's that about?
It's the background, what they call it, Atuguba team at the Supreme Court recommended that the standards of the people who are used as presiding officers, as returning officers, should be improved, because some of the mistakes they made on the ballot accounting sheet, the pink sheet, was really terrible. So the commission now says that, of course, we will generally ask people with higher qualifications to be involved, but at the collation centers, two important people will be deployed. One, a lawyer who is different from the returning officer, who will vet the ballot accounting sheet to see that they filled it appropriately. Then an accountant who, apart from the returning officer going through the tally and giving the final results at every collation center, who will also go through same and endorse it that this is the right figure. So two important professionals will also be at every one of those 275 collation centers.
Okay, Raymond, I'll come back to you to explore what that process will mean in terms of the period for the declaration of results and whether or not this can be a recipe for some chaos. But let's hear the EC boss explaining why this has become important.
Again, it's something that we're looking at. We've had some engagement with the Ghana Bar Association and with the chartered accountants. And no, it's not exactly the JEGA model, because JEGA is running a federal system, and so you have state electoral commissioners, and so their structure is quite different from ours. And you also have to take your political culture into account when you are doing, if you are trying to copy an example from someone. I don't think that in Nigeria they have, what are groups called? TAIN, and then there's another one, TESCON, and all this. So you can't just, we can't take everything they're doing. But what we're trying to see is when we finish with all the main things we have to do with elections and the commission approves, is to have at the constituency collation centers members of the Ghana Bar and the Institute of Chartered Accountants. When you're tallying in the collation process to remove errors, we think it may be beneficial to have another layer of checks. So you'd have the lawyers checking that the forms are properly filled, properly signed off, and then you'd have the accountants also making sure that, as a lawyer, I don't think we're very good at counting. We'll have the accountants also check and make sure that the numbers have been added up properly. It's just another layer of checks, which brings another layer of integrity into the process, so that by the time we do the final tallying, we're all comfortable that the processes prior to that have been properly conducted and that the elections, the results actually reflect the will of the people of Ghana.
Right, that's the chair of the Electoral Commission, Charlotte Osei, explaining that matter to do with why they will be hiring, or let me put it this way, inviting the services of lawyers and accountants on election day. I will be curious to find out what the political parties make of these reforms, especially with how long this will take, how this will influence the time space within which results from collation centers will be declared. We'll explore that later and speak to some political parties for their views on this. But Raymond, what other things came up today as part of the reforms to expect in this year's elections? Okay,
so already the EC has given timelines for the continuous registration. They say that from next year, every Friday, they are going to do this particular registration. So unlike this year that they are giving specific periods for it, from next year, they are going to do the registration every other Friday. So immediately 10/18, you can just walk in and go and do your registration.
And that starts January 1, 2017?
Yes, immediately next year, after this particular year's election. Also, the point that we're talking about, the people who will be doing the elections, the EC says that they'll be rewarded handsomely this time around. Previously, they said they were less motivated to do what is right, and that the political parties were luring them with small money. So the EC says that it's going to increase the amount of money as allowance it gives to these people, because also the people with higher qualifications are going to be engaged.
So Raymond, specifics. If they say they are increasing it, from what amount to what amount?
Okay, so the presiding officer was taking 100 cedi. They didn't state but she said to be more than the 100 cedi that were given to presiding officers previously. And for example, those below the presiding officers who were taking 80, 50, and some were even taking 60 cedi, those people will also be given much more money so that they can concentrate on delivering credible elections at the polling station level. But they will not go free. Now, unlike previously, the sanctions regime has also been improved. It starts from fines, some very high penalty units of fines that you may have to pay.
Like what?
To about 12,000 penalty units of sanctions. That accumulates like from 5,000 Ghana cedi if indeed you actually get yourself into trouble on the election day as a presiding officer. But also, if your crime is that grave, you can go to jail for it, up to 2 good years of being in jail for not managing the polling station properly. These officers now have some powers too. They'll be able to sack even polling agents of political parties when they misbehave. So they are the chairpersons on the grounds there. Whenever there's anybody misbehaving, they can sack you from that particular station.
Their powers are now far-reaching. Good to hear. Let's hear the EC speak on these sanction regime and the kind of powers these presiding officers have been given at the polling station level. Then we will interrogate these reforms and see if it has been agreed on, first by the political parties at the IPAC level, and whether or not these ideas are feasible. We'll come to that in just a moment. But Raymond, what other things are we looking at?
Okay, so the EC is also saying that a national coalition center they've talked about is being set up. So they'll make sure that even before the election date, the strong-room mentality within the EC's headquarters will be disbanded. In fact, they'll look for a very big place. There'll be media persons, political parties representatives, so that a screen shows when the results arrive. I mean, nobody's going to touch it. The automatic tally will do it. We know that the results for Bantama has already arrived with some number of votes for this party and that for that. Then it adds up automatically. That is what they are going to do.
When you say no one will touch it, it's a computer. The data will be tabulated. It shows on a screen.
So they say that by their electronic system, the results from the constituency will come and reflect automatically there.
Straight.
Yes. So it won't be as if now that somebody has received a fax, the person will now have to input something before it shows up like they did previously.
Okay.
This time around, there will be an automatic relay so that people will see really what is happening right from the various constituencies. In fact, the element of having to do electronic voting is one thing that they say they are considering very seriously, but not for this particular year's election. Indeed, they deferred it because of the technical challenges they may face and their lack of preparation for rolling it out immediately. So that particular element has not been dealt with properly. Now, on the part of having, courts deciding matters, they're saying that not only is it important that the various magistrates within districts are put on alert to deal with election issues. So, for example, if I, at the polling station, has difficulties, they'll do a first recount. The second recount will be at the collation center. If I still have a problem with specific results from a specific polling station, I can then file a petition there, which will go to the magistrate. Within 3 days, the magistrate will sit on the matter and resolve the issue.
Okay.
So this is some of the steps that they are putting in place to ensure that right from the beginning of the process till the time, of course, they also want to give the various political parties the final voters register 60 clear days before the election.
Which is standard protocol, isn't it?
Very good, but it was 30 days first, but now it says 60 clear days before the election. The other thing they also want to do to everybody is that you and I can get to know our exact polling stations, because they have added more to it, 60 clear days before the elections, not only on their, website, but any other venue or appropriate forum that can be used to actually disseminate that information.
Okay, now key things play out for me with the kind of reforms we're seeing. First, on the matter of the grave sanction regimes for the electoral officers, did they specify which ones will attract the 12,000 penalty and which ones will attract the 2-year imprisonment?
Okay, so she actually could not do so. She said she didn't have a CI 94, that is the regulating law, with her immediately. But she says that it's been spelled out clearly in the CI 94, which makes it very difficult for presiding officers to make mistakes of the past and the electoral process being blamed for it.
Okay. Now, on the matter of e-voting, you mentioned that they say this will not be possible for this year's election. Did she explain why that cannot be possible? Because I remember that in 2012, when these issues came up, that was one of the key suggestions that was being made, in fact, by some of the major political parties. How come that's not possible now?
She said that it requires a much more broader system, a literate population in electronic voting, 1. 2, a lot of technological setup that they are not ready now. In fact, they said they welcomed the idea. It was considered. In fact, it's number 16 on their list of 27 most important reforms they want to roll out. In the future, probably 2020, we may be able to vote electronically.
For the overvoting and the verification matter, did she explain, even in as much as she mentions the verified votes and the rejected ballots, its summation being more than the registered voters being overvoting? Did she explain how manual verification plays into this whole equation?
That question was not clearly explained, because ideally we would expect that since they've introduced the new version, at first we were under the impression that no verification, no voting is a standard to play out. But they're saying that because some people may have, and it's machines, she explained that it's machines, they may have problems on the day, even though they have reduced the possibility of these machines having problems. They still believe that if you can't go through the process, and we see your name on the register, we see your face on the register, all that they need to do is pick out a form, write all your details, and make sure that you go through the process. In fact, the question then comes in, how would you add the manually verified people to the BDV verifications, then compare same and compare it to what's supposed to be in the ballot box?
Did she answer that question?
What? She didn't answer the question. She actually missed that particular question in her answers when she was giving the details.
Okay, so clearly some reforms have been spelled out for implementation for this year's elections. Of course, there are still some niggling questions we need to ask. After this short break, we will speak to some of the political parties on what they make of these suggestions and whether or not they will be part of this process to ensure that the reforms are implemented to the letter. Stay with us.